Have you ever noticed how some people seem to think with a clarity that feels almost unreal? They don't consume endless content. They don't follow every trend. They simply create. And somehow, their thoughts feel deeper, more original, more alive than everyone else's. Now imagine if you could think like that. If your thoughts emerged from your own mind rather than from algorithms. If your ideas came from deep reflection rather than shallow consumption. But here's the brutal truth you need to face right now. You've become another product of the algorithm. Predictable, obedient, numb. Your brain has been hijacked by forces you don't even recognize. And you're calling it freedom. Nietzsche predicted this over a century ago. He saw the coming age of what he called the last man. Humans who would give up the struggle to become something greater and choose comfortable mediocrity instead. Humans who would mistake being entertained for being alive. Look at yourself. Your phone predicts your behavior with terrifying accuracy. Your thoughts echo what you've consumed rather than what you've created. You reach for distraction the moment you feel even a whisper of emptiness. You've become exactly what Nietzsche feared most, a creature that has forgotten what it means to think. This isn't just about technology. This is about the systematic destruction of your will to power, your capacity for authentic thought, your very humanity. You've been transformed into what Nietzsche called a member of the herd, a passive consumer who mistakes following for living. When was the last time you had an original thought? When did you last create something that came entirely from your own mind? You can't answer these questions because you've been systematically conditioned to avoid them. Your capacity for original thought has been eroded so gradually that you didn't even notice it disappearing. The uncomfortable recognition you're feeling right now, that's your authentic self, screaming to be acknowledged. That's the part of you that remembers what it feels like to be genuinely alive. Brain rot isn't modern. It's the oldest form of control in human history, now perfected to a degree that would make ancient tyrants weep with envy. The Roman emperors discovered something profound. The easiest way to control people isn't through fear, it's through comfort. Panem and circuses, bread and circuses. Give people just enough to survive, and endless entertainment to occupy their minds, and they'll never question their chains. But here's what those ancient rulers never achieved: getting people to forge their own chains, to choose their own enslavement, to defend the very system that's destroying them. Your smartphone has accomplished what no dictator in history could manage. You carry your prison with you everywhere, and you pay for the privilege. You've been conditioned to believe that constant stimulation is freedom, that endless choice is empowerment, that being connected means being alive. This is what Nietzsche called the herd mentality, amplified to terrifying proportions. You don't just follow the crowd, you've become the crowd. Your thoughts aren't your own anymore. They're algorithmic suggestions that you mistake for personal insights. Consider this carefully. Every time you reach for your phone to escape a moment of silence, you're proving to the system that you can't tolerate your own consciousness. You're demonstrating that you need external validation to feel real. You're confessing that you'd rather be entertained than be authentic. The manipulation is so sophisticated, but you don't even realize it's happening. You think you're choosing what to watch, what to buy, what to believe. But you're not choosing. You're being chosen. The algorithm knows what you'll click before you click it. Your behavior has become so predictable that you're essentially a biological robot, following digital commands. This is mass psychological control, operating at a level that makes traditional propaganda look primitive. They don't need to tell you what to think. They simply shape the environment in which your thoughts occur. They don't control your mind directly. They control the inputs that shape your mind. At this very moment, as you hear these words, you're going through something that the philosopher Nietzsche would have seen as the collapse of the human spirit. You've been turned into a kind of machine, someone who reacts without thinking, consumes without creating, and moves through life without truly feeling alive. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened through a process so gradual that you didn't even notice you were losing yourself. One notification at a time, one scroll at a time, one mindless consumption session at a time. Your dopamine receptors had been hijacked. The neural pathways that once responded to real accomplishment, genuine connection, and authentic creation have been rewired to crave the artificial stimulation of likes, shares, and digital validation. You've become addicted to a simulation of life, while your actual life withers away. Can you sit in silence for 30 minutes without feeling like you're suffocating? Can you read a book for hours without feeling restless? Can you have a conversation without checking your phone? If these basic human capacities have become difficult, you've already been partially zombified. Nietzsche spoke of the will to power, not power over others, but the inner force that drives you to create, to overcome limitations, to become something greater than your current self. This will is what makes you fundamentally human. But digital conditioning systematically weakens this force, replacing it with what we might call the will to comfort, the desperate need to avoid challenge, growth, and the beautiful difficulty of becoming. You used to dream of creating something meaningful. Now you dream of going viral. You used to solve problems through deep thinking. Now you Google someone else's answer. You used to be the author of your own thoughts. Now you're a curator of other people's ideas. This is what Nietzsche meant when he warned about the last man. Humans who have given up the struggle to become something greater, who seek only comfort, safety, and the warm embrace of mediocrity. The last man doesn't suffer dramatically. He suffers subtly, chronically, almost imperceptibly. He feels a constant low-level dissatisfaction that he can't quite identify. Your attention span has been fragmented into microseconds. Your capacity for deep focus has atrophied. Your ability to think complex thoughts has been replaced by the ability to process simple stimuli. You've been systematically dumbed down, and you've been conditioned to enjoy the process. Teams of neuroscientists, behavioral psychologists, and former casino designers have spent billions of dollars studying how to make digital products irresistible. They've weaponized your brain's reward system, turning your phone into a slot machine that you carry everywhere. The slot machine wants your money. Your phone wants something far more valuable, your consciousness itself. What you call staying connected is actually a sophisticated form of psychological imprisonment. You're not just consuming content, you're consuming identity. Every meme you share, every post you like, every comment you make is a small declaration of who you think you are. But you're not creating this identity. It's being manufactured for you. The algorithm learns your psychological profile with supernatural accuracy and feeds it back to you in an endless loop. You think you're discovering new ideas, but you're actually being shown increasingly refined versions of what you already believe. You're not expanding your consciousness, you're contracting it into a perfectly curated echo chamber. This is Nietzsche's herd mentality, amplified beyond anything he could have imagined. When humans stop creating their own values, they become unconscious followers of whatever values happen to be dominant. But what happens when those dominant values are shaped not by wisdom or tradition, but by whatever keeps you scrolling longest? You've become what Nietzsche called a slave in the deepest psychological sense. Not because someone is forcing you to comply, but because you've lost a capacity to think independently. You define yourself through your relationship to others, rather than through your own values and achievements. Instead of asking, what do I want to create? You ask, what do others want me to consume? Instead of asking, what do I believe? You ask, what's trending? Instead of developing your own perspective, You adopt whatever perspective feels safest, most popular, most validated by the crowd. The validation you get from likes, shares, and comments has become more important than the validation you get from real accomplishment. The approval of strangers has become more valuable than self-respect. The comfort of following has become more appealing than the challenge of leading your own life. You've traded your will to power for the will to fit in. You've exchanged your potential for greatness for the guarantee of belonging. You've chosen the warm embrace of the crowd over the cold responsibility of individual thought. This psychological dependency is so complete that you can't imagine life without it. The idea of not knowing what everyone else is thinking feels like death. The prospect of being alone with your own thoughts feels unbearable. You've become so externally focused that you've lost contact with your internal world. But here's what's really happening. You're not just being controlled, you're being harvested. Your attention, your data, your behavioral patterns, your psychological vulnerabilities are all being extracted and monetized. You're not the customer of these platforms, you're the product being sold. Something has happened to human ambition that Nietzsche would have found deeply disturbing. You used to have dreams that scared you, goals that seemed impossible, visions that required you to become someone you'd never been before. Now you have objectives that feel manageable, plans that minimize risk, aspirations that guarantee mediocre results. This is what Nietzsche called the Great Leveling, the process by which all individual differences get smoothed out by the relentless pressure to conform. Excellence becomes suspicious, ambition becomes problematic, originality becomes uncomfortable. Everyone must be reduced to the same level of acceptable mediocrity. Your life has become a perfectly efficient machine for converting time into digital stimulation. You wake up, check your phone, consume content, work, consume more content, sleep, repeat. When did efficiency become more important than meaning? When did optimization become more valuable than growth? The algorithm has perfected the art of keeping you in a state of perpetual almost satisfied, but not enough to stop consuming. Almost fulfilled, but not enough to stop searching. Almost happy, but not enough to stop scrolling. You're trapped in a psychological space where you're never miserable enough to change, but never satisfied enough to rest. This is your life on digital optimization. You're running on a treadmill as fast as you can to stay in exactly the same place, and you've convinced yourself that the movement itself is progress. But Nietzsche understood something we've forgotten. Humans weren't designed for comfort. They were designed to overcome obstacles, to face challenges, to become something greater than their current limitations. The struggle isn't the enemy of happiness. It's the source of meaning. When you avoid discomfort, you also avoid growth. When you choose safety, you also choose stagnation. When you optimize for comfort, you optimize against the very experiences that make life worth living. You feel a constant low-level dissatisfaction that you can't quite identify. You have that nagging sense that life should feel more meaningful than it does. You recognize that you're capable of so much more than you're currently expressing, that instead of listening to these signals, you numb them with more consumption. This is the psychological profile of what Nietzsche called the last man, a creature that has forgotten what it feels like to be truly alive, someone who has accepted mediocrity as inevitable, someone who has chosen existence over life, survival over thriving, comfort over the beautiful struggle of becoming. The tragedy isn't that you lack potential. The tragedy is that your potential is being systematically suppressed by forces that profit from your compliance. You're being kept in a state of perpetual psychological adolescence, never quite growing up, never quite taking full responsibility for your own consciousness. Suddenly, you see yourself from the outside. Really see yourself. You're sitting in the same position you've been in for hours, thumb moving automatically, eyes glazed over, mind in a trance-like state. Your body is present, but you are absent. You're alive, but you're not living. This moment of recognition is what Nietzsche called the beginning of self-overcoming. It's the instant when you stop being unconscious about your choices and start seeing them clearly. It's the psychological shock of realizing that you've been sleepwalking through your own life. This awakening is brutal because it reveals how much time you've lost, how many hours you've spent consuming that could have been spent creating, how many opportunities you've missed because you were too distracted to notice them, how many parts of yourself you've neglected because you were too busy managing your digital persona. But here's what makes this moment dangerous to those who profit from your unconsciousness. It's the beginning of your rebellion. It's the instant when you stop being a passive consumer and start becoming an active creator of your own experience. Nietzsche understood that true transformation always begins with what he called the great disgust. Not just mild dissatisfaction, but deep, visceral recognition that the way you've been living is beneath your potential. The kind of recognition that makes comfort impossible and change inevitable. You realize you've spent more time watching other people live their lives than actually living your own. You understand that you've been training your brain to prefer instant gratification over long-term fulfillment. You see that you've become addicted to a simulation of connection while your capacity for real intimacy has atrophied. This disgust isn't your enemy, it's your salvation. It's your psyche's way of telling you that you're living beneath your capabilities, that you're designed for something far greater than endless consumption, that you have creative potential that's been dormant for too long. The awakening forces you to confront questions you've been avoiding. What do you want when you're not being told what to want? What would you create if you couldn't share it with anyone? These questions feel dangerous because they reveal how much of your identity depends on external validation. How much of your self-worth comes from algorithmic approval? How much of your sense of purpose comes from following trends rather than setting them? But they're also liberating because they point toward the possibility of becoming someone real, someone authentic, someone who creates value rather than just consuming it, someone who lives consciously rather than automatically. Nietzsche would tell you that becoming free isn't about following someone else's system. It's about creating your own. But after years of digital conditioning, you've forgotten how to be your own authority. You've outsourced your thinking to algorithms, your creativity to content creators, your values to whatever happens to be trending. Breaking free requires what Nietzsche called self-overcoming, the gradual process of destroying who you've become in order to create who you're meant to be. This isn't self-improvement, it's self-revolution. The first step is acknowledging a truth that most people can't handle. Your mind doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the systems that have conditioned it. Your thoughts aren't your own, they're algorithmic suggestions. Your desires aren't authentic, they're manufactured. Your opinions aren't considered, they're implanted. But here's what they can't take from you: your capacity to choose consciousness over unconsciousness. They can influence your environment, but they can't force you to surrender your awareness. They can shape your impulses, but they can't eliminate your ability to observe those impulses without being controlled by them. True rebellion begins with reclaiming your attention. Not just removing apps from your phone, though that's necessary, but developing what Nietzsche called intellectual probity, the courage to think your own thoughts and follow them wherever they lead. This means questioning everything you think you know: success, happiness, productivity, connection. These words have been weaponized against you. What do they actually mean when you strip away the marketing, the social pressure, the algorithmic influence? The process requires what Nietzsche called amor fati, love of fate. Not passive acceptance, but active embrace of the difficulty required for genuine transformation. You must learn to love the struggle of becoming conscious in a world designed to keep you unconscious. Can you sit in complete silence for an hour without reaching for any device? Can you take a walk without podcasts, music, or any digital stimulation? Can you eat a meal without distraction? These aren't punishments, they're practices for reclaiming your capacity to be present with your own experience. Then comes the deeper work, creating instead of consuming, writing your own thoughts instead of sharing other people's ideas, building something with your hands instead of buying something with your credit card, developing your own perspective instead of adopting whatever perspective feels safest. The creative act reconnects you with what Nietzsche called your will to power, not power over others, but the fundamental drive to create, to overcome limitations, to become something greater than your current self. Finally, you must learn to tolerate what Nietzsche called the loneliness of the individual. As you become more conscious, you'll naturally distance yourself from unconscious people. As you develop your own values, you'll stop fitting into ready-made categories. As you think your own thoughts, you'll find fewer people who understand you. This isn't isolation, it's individuation. You're not becoming antisocial. You're becoming genuinely social by learning to relate to others from a place of authentic self-knowledge rather than desperate need for validation. Something extraordinary emerges when you complete this process of conscious self-creation. You become what Nietzsche called a free spirit, someone who has liberated themselves from the tyranny of mass thinking and learned to create their own meaning. You wake up without immediately reaching for your phone. The first thoughts of your day are actually your thoughts. You've learned to be alone without being lonely, to think without being told what to think, to feel without being told what to feel. Your mind has become sovereign territory. Your attention span has been rebuilt. You can read books for hours without distraction. You can have conversations without checking your phone. You can work on meaningful projects without needing constant stimulation. You've reclaimed the capacity for deep focus, the superpower that separates creators from consumers. You've developed what Nietzsche called intellectual courage, the willingness to think thoughts that make you uncomfortable, to question beliefs that feel sacred, to follow ideas wherever they lead, regardless of social approval. Your relationship to information has fundamentally changed. Instead of consuming everything, you've become radically selective. Instead of reacting to every stimulus, you choose your responses. Instead of following every trend, you create your own direction. You no longer need external validation to feel valuable. You've learned to generate your own sense of worth through your actions, your creations, your choices. The approval of strangers has become irrelevant. The comfort of following has become less appealing than the challenge of leading your own life. Your relationships have transformed. Instead of seeking validation from digital connections, you've learned to create genuine intimacy with real people. Instead of performing a curated version of yourself, you've learned to be authentically yourself in actual relationships. You've discovered what Nietzsche meant when he said, "Become who you are," not who others want you to be, not who the algorithm rewards you for being, but who you actually are beneath all the conditioning. This doesn't mean you've become perfect. It means you've become real. You've stopped living other people's lives and started living your own. You've joined what Nietzsche called the free spirits, humans who refuse to be controlled by external forces. You've become dangerous in the best possible way, dangerous to systems that profit from human unconsciousness, dangerous to algorithms that depend on predictable behavior, dangerous to anyone who wants to control your attention, your thoughts, your life. You think for yourself. You create your own values. You live according to your own vision. You've become what every totalitarian system fears most, a human being who cannot be controlled. Everything comes down to this moment. You've seen what you've become. You've understood how the conditioning works. You've glimpsed what's possible if you choose consciousness over comfort. Most people will choose the familiar path. They'll return to the digital trance because breaking free requires them to face themselves honestly, and that kind of honesty feels overwhelming. They'll choose the comfort of unconsciousness over the difficulty of becoming real. But if you've made it this far, something in you is already different. Something in you remembers what it feels like to be authentically alive. The choice isn't between technology and nature, digital and analog, modern and traditional. The choice is between consciousness and unconsciousness, creation and consumption, authentic presence and digital performance. You can become what Nietzsche called a free spirit, someone who has learned to think their own thoughts, create their own values, live according to their own vision, someone who generates meaning from within rather than consuming it from without. Every time you choose silence over stimulation, you prove that conscious choice is still possible. Every time you create instead of consuming, you demonstrate that human consciousness cannot be completely automated. Every time you think for yourself instead of accepting what you're told to think, you show that individual awareness can emerge from collective conditioning. This transformation isn't just personal. It becomes a form of resistance. By becoming so authentically yourself, you give others permission to remember what they've forgotten about their own potential. Your consciousness belongs to you. Your attention is yours to direct. Your life is yours to create. They cannot take your knowledge. They cannot decide what you think or feel. This is yours and must be conquered and maintained. Nietzsche said, "Only those who face the void and reconquer their own will can escape the control of the last man." The question isn't whether you're capable of this transformation. You are. The question is whether you're ready to begin the work of becoming who you were always meant to be. How will you choose to begin?